All right, I think we'll proceed and let people join as they come. Thanks everyone for joining that made it, and special thanks to the growers that sent in slides. See Adam Hausman's here. Hopefully Paul Betts will be able to join us later, and some others. And the webinar is being recorded, and I'll probably post the slides separately just for people to view as well down the road here. And if I can get the thing to advance. So I just wanted to start with what brings us all here today, and that is the serrated ovipositor of the spotted wing Drosophila. So unlike other species of vinegar flies, it is able to cut into firm fruit and lay its eggs, and that is what is causing all the concern. And you're all familiar with the recommended practices, I'm sure. And I drew that line there really because above it, my view is you really have to pick. Are you going to use exclusion? And if not, you probably need to try and control the insects. And the cultural practices below really apply to everybody, whichever strategy above you're using. So today we'll talk a little bit about insecticides, but mostly focus on the netting systems that people are using. On the larger scale farms like Sunshine Valley Berry Farm, which has 6 acres of crops, netting is probably unrealistic economically, so spraying is the option they've chosen. And Rob Meadows couldn't be here today, but he sent in some pictures of his systems, and there he is with his 25-gallon spray tank being pulled by his riding mower. And he shared his current practices, and he is switched from spraying different sections of the farm and then opening them up for pick your own after the pre-harvest, post-harvest interval has passed, to spraying the entire planting weekly, including the boundary areas, and then closing the farm for a single day before going back to pick your own. He's using Entrust SC twice, rotated with Pyganic, and he is adding adjuvants. Used to be just sugar, but now erythritol, which I'll mention in a minute, and he's using the traps for monitoring the commercial traps. Sam Lincoln shared a picture of his spray rig. He's growing raspberries, and he has a system that's also pulled with a small riding mower. So his 35-gallon tank holds his materials. One thing he did was rotate the boom from horizontal to vertical to be able to cover this entire crop, and he's calculating the acreage that he's spraying based on this vertical crop's length and height, not so much the land area. And he's also using Entrust rotated with Pyganic and adding a spreader sticker in film P. He said he's been using this for 4 years and it's been effective for him. So just to talk a little bit about the insecticide options, one challenge obviously is that there's only one material that's relatively effective for organic producers, and that's spinosad, but it has to be rotated, and people are generally using Pyganic as that rotation material, even though its efficacy is pretty limited. I did some digging into this days to harvest limitation. So for a period there, all Entrust formulations had the 3-day to harvest, which made it challenging for pick your own especially. And it's still a little confusing. There's an Entrust SC label out there, special use label that expired, but was 1 day to harvest. But then I was able to get from Eric Bohr at Nutrien the Entrust label that shows it is 1 day to harvest for the Entrust SC. So this is the latest Cornell guide from the 15th of this month that's posted, but the Yukon spray guide still shows 3 days to harvest. So the long and short of it is, follow the label that you have for the material that you purchase, and if you're going to buy the Entrust SC, double check that label if it's the 1 day that you're after. So about adjuvants, which are not materials that have to have pesticide registrations because they are added just to enhance the effectiveness of a spray. So as long as you're using a material that way, you don't have to have a label. And for organic growers, using either sugar or erythritol is allowed, and it doesn't have to be an organic form of those materials. So I just got an email from Rich Coles at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station this morning, steering me to more of the research publications. And it is pretty clear that adding 2 pounds of this erythritol plus a ½ pound of table sugar in 100 gallons of spray is pretty effective at enhancing the activity of other insecticides. And erythritol is a food grade material that's made from corn. It's actually present in small amounts naturally in fruits anyway. So this is something I definitely would consider doing if you are spraying insecticides. It's a good idea to monitor what kind of pressure you have so you know the necessity of spraying. And for many years, we messed around with all these homemade traps and making different baits out of cider vinegar and yeast and things like that. Fortunately, now there are commercial traps available that just makes it a whole lot easier, and they're pretty reasonably priced. And these are the 2 most common brands, the Trace and the Sentry. And you still have to add a drowning solution in there, but it comes with the baits and the traps all set to go. So I want to go into netting now and just kind of cover the evolution in Vermont, at least as I know it. So Jerry Smith down in Guilford was the first farm that I know of that had spotted wing Drosophila. I think it was in 2012, and he started covering just these rows of fall raspberries with simple electrical conduit and the netting. And the nice thing about this system is if you get the netting in the 13-foot, 10-inch wide strips, you don't have to do any sewing. You can just put it right over there and weight it down. And he was picking on his own, so didn't have customers going in there. He just kept it all covered and weighted down with stones and went in when he had to. And he thought it was pretty effective. So the next year I set up a system on my berry patch with traps inside and out, and the numbers were pretty convincing. So right around this time of year, we got a huge spike, and the netting clearly kept the SWD out of the crop. So I'm a believer, and this year I just built this system on my raspberry patch. It's a pretty small planting, but I learned a couple things. One is I went from the 3/4 inch conduit to the 1 inch just for greater stability. That helped a lot. And I anchor it with 4-foot rebar and support it with 2x4 posts, and then rip a couple of the posts to build braces for them. So when you add this all up, just the materials come out to 46 cents per square foot. One thing I like about this conduit is when you're a one-man show, it's pretty easy to slide the netting right over the top. And again, that's what it ends up looking like. So this doesn't account for the labor. It took about a day to set up the netting structure, and my wife spent about a half a day measuring and cutting and then sewing the strips with her grandmother's 100-year-old Singer machine. The original netting I have, which was the 80-gram, is starting to fray. Put it on in 2012, so it's pretty much met its expected lifespan, and I'm using binder clips to connect the rips as best I can till I replace it next year. It's been a lot of different netting research going on, and here's one from Cornell Cooperative Extension in the Hudson Valley Research Center, and this is a slide I stole from their presentation, Peter Jensch, at the New England Vegetable and Fruit Conference last December, and they're making long coverings of raspberries here. Interestingly, it's coming out at a very similar cost per square foot. And one thing I was surprised when I collected all these slides from growers, everybody seems to be in about the same materials cost range, regardless of the real differences in systems, which was a surprise to me. One thing in this talk Peter Jensch gave was interesting. In the year they didn't have a vestibule type entryway, but just a single layer, they had almost complete infestation because people are going in and out, and the SWD got in there. So they added this double entryway and used cooler door kinds of panels. He's also got an attract and kill station set up in that entryway, and that kept their infestation quite low. And I'll show you that attract and kill system at the end. This is Steve and Kathy Vandivord system up in Grand Isle. They're netting about 12,000 square feet. They just put this up this year. And you can see they're using metal piping, and he's putting up panels of the netting. So I believe instead of sewing it all together on the top and the sides, it's the panels go in and they're held in there with wiggle wire that you can see fit into this frame. And he used some old materials, not counting the labor. Again, his cost is coming out about 50 cents a square foot. This is a picture of a project that Chris has been involved in, SARE-funded farmer grant project at Dale Riggs Farm, the berry patch in Stephentown, New York. Dale also runs berry protection solutions and is selling the netting. And I'm not sure exactly how big is this, Chris, probably about an acre.
It's half acre.
Half an acre, so pretty big system. And you can see that she's got a vestibule type entryway that I know she worked out several years ago to keep the SWD from getting in there, and using sand, I think sand-filled tubes to weight down the edges. That's what the structure looks like before it's covered. And Chris has got a video of it being put together that he'll show when I'm done. And that's an inside picking environment, which is really nice. In my conduit system, the edges are kind of like a small high tunnel. You've got to bend over to get the clearance, but this gives a lot of space. And here's the system Paul Betts put up last year at his farm in Woodbury over the blueberries. Another one that's about 15,000 square feet. And he's using metal conduit and pipes spaced, I think I said 10 feet on a 10-foot grid. So here's the numbers on that. And again, his cost is coming out in the same range, 51 cents square foot. He was noting he could have done it for a lower cost by stretching that grid spacing out and looking for a better price on the pipe. One thing he's done that's interesting here is using the wood baseboard and also the wood part of the framing as a to hold the slots for the wiggle wire to go in. And I'm not sure what kind. This is looks like more heavy duty wiggle wire than is typical on tunnels. Hopefully Paul can join us and elaborate. Another picture he sent that's pretty cool is he put together these jigs for rolling up the netting panels when you're done. And yeah, this has got to be a challenge when you have a whole lot of netting, putting it together for storage. And then Adam Hausman sent these pictures. He's on the line, so he's already had high tunnels in place for growing fruit and put the SWD netting on the ends, supported by, looks like PVC pipe, and also hanging it on the inside for the roll-up sides. So you get the benefits of environmental control of the high tunnel, as well as exclusion of the SWD, and only having to net the roll-up sides and the end walls since you had the plastic on the top, so a lot less netting cost. I should mention in my system, and I'm not so sure about the others, but the netting cost was about half of the total material expense. And for all these costs, obviously you have to add the labor and figure out how you're going to amortize those, the netting and the frame costs. And the, the netting, I think, is scheduled for 7-year lifespan. I use the 85 gram. It's now available from Berry Protection Solutions. There's also an 80 gram. And my understanding is now there's a wider width available than the 13-foot 10. I think it's twice that width. So that will require a lot less sewing for covering a large area. So just quickly, 2 slides on what's in the works. So this attract and kill idea of having a bait kind of station that you could put out in large quantities because they're small and inexpensive. And the Gench lab at Cornell is working on this, using the netting as a bait and adding these materials to hold the bait, the active ingredient. I think they're using boric acid as one of the toxins. So you have the attractant and the stuff that gets the insects to, yes, stick to it as well. And there's a big project that's nationwide and international that's looking at parasitoids, and there are 3 of them that have been identified from Japan, South Korea, China, and one of them apparently is getting to the permitting stage to field test in the US. So this could be really helpful if it comes to fruition. So a lot of information is linked on the SWD page that's on the VT Veg and Berry site. I'll also post these slides there, as well as a link to the recording. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris to show his video, and then we'll open it up to discussion. Take it away, Chris.
Hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, give me 1 sec. You should see a start of a video. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So, hi everybody, Chris Callahan, Ag Engineering with UVM Extension. And I saw that Dale Isla's on the call as well. So Dale, anything I say incorrect, correct me, and anything you want to add, we can get you unmuted and have you chime in. I've been fortunate enough to be part of a SARE-funded farmer grant down at Dale Isla's place, the Berry Patch in Stephentown, New York, that Vern had an aerial view of earlier. And this is, it's using TechNet netting, 85 gram, which now has a sort of a ripstop feature in it to stop any sort of early cuts or nicks from spreading too far. And this is, I think, 3rd or 4th generation of the structure. Dale has used hoops in the past, high tunnel hoops, and just some pressure treated posts as well. This is a system coming from Gintech Shade Technologies. It's derived from a ginseng shade structure. It's posts and wire. You can see wood posts in the foreground, and there are steel posts in the background. We're trying 2 different approaches in this one planting just to get familiar with it. And then it's tensile wire strung between them, and that becomes the grid, if you will. Those are it's 20 foot spacing in one direction and 15 in the other. And so that becomes the grid that you put the netting over. Give me 1 second. And this is what it looks like with the netting going on. The system we came up with was, tie a rope around the end of one of the panels and drag it along. We have those little PVC T tools to help push it over the wires as we go. This is about 9 feet in the air at the top of the wire, at top of the post. So it does make for a very comfortable space inside. But it's just beyond the limit of most people's reach to work on comfortably as it's going up. So a lot of ladder work and some special tools. But you can see the netting going in here, and then these get attached to each other with zippers. These have zippers along the length of them, and then they get zipped together panel to panel, and then hog rings tie it to the structure itself, to the wire rather. And then just to give you a sense of what it looks like when it's done, almost. This is just before we started sealing up the perimeter. Yeah, it makes for, as Vern was saying, makes for a pretty open, airy inside environment. There's a lot of we had a lot of fun with earth anchors and augering post holes. And this is, like I said, I think it's a 2-year farmer grant project, and we just got done with this piece of it 3 weeks ago, I guess. And we'll be writing up a lot of lessons learned. We'll be writing them up and putting together better videos than what I just showed you, and sharing it at future meetings. And Dale Isla may have more to add to that. Feel free to unmute, Dale.
You there, Dale? Oh, Chris, do you guys have any sense of cost yet? I know
Yes,
you will
thanks.
be looking at it.
Good question. Yeah. So this is a half acre, and the structural pieces for steel, which would be the more expensive of the two, it was about would be about $4,300, netting about $7,500, and to get that into per square foot, it's about 55 cents per square foot. The labor, we were doing this for the first time. None of us had really done much with post and wire trellising, learning a lot on the fly and working with Gintech and TechNet along the way. I think it's pretty reasonable for this to get done in about a week with a 3 to 4 person crew, maybe even better. But so give you a ballpark.
But it is pretty interesting that all the systems are coming in about 45 to 55 cents a square foot, and from the small backyard systems to this.
The netting for this one, it's interesting, was probably more like 3/4 of the cost, 7,500 out of 11,800. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I finally got my microphone unmuted. So this is Dale Isla.
Hey, Dale.
So I think there are a couple take-homes for me. Certainly, this was a big learning process, even though I've had the half acre covered this is my 7th year now, putting up a new structure that none of us were familiar with. I don't advise doing that in the spring, right before you need to cover. Been a little stressful. But now that we are doing a lot more pick your own than I've done in the past, every single pick your own customer absolutely loves this. And people have talked about they won't like the vestibule, and I'm doing about 30 seconds of education before I take them in, and I actually have samples of some spotted wing Drosophila for people to see how tiny this insect is, and I'm showing that to everybody. And they're walking in through the vestibule, and then I join them later for social distancing. But it's pretty cool because I stand on the outside, let them into the vestibule, they let themselves into the planting, they zip it up, they turn around, and every single party so far goes, wow. And part of it is that our bushes are also super laden with fruit right now, but everybody absolutely loves the atmosphere under here and feels it's a little bit cooler. Steve and Kathy Vandivord have done this a couple years as well and have gotten lots of positive comments, to the point where people have talked about, people might want to have weddings, or you could hold weddings under this structure. So I know people have been kind of hesitant in the pick your own arena, especially for doing this, but I have gotten nothing but absolutely positive comments, and people just think it's the coolest thing.
Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Dale. Let's see, I see Adam is here, and I showed a picture of his netted high tunnels. Adam, anything you want to share about your experience using netting in the tunnels?
So I guess I don't have the exact cost, but obviously our netting costs are less just doing the sidewalls and ends. We haven't done the vestibule, and we talk about it every year, but we would like to add that. So I think if people are considering it, certainly build it in, even if it's just a simple 2x4 structure that creates that box. I think it's worth it. We have it set up that people enter, it's a triple bay house, so people enter one house at the same spot and then kind of use that as the entrance and exit way at all times. And it's just the protocol, opening and closing right immediately. I guess the only thing we haven't been netting our blueberries, and we occasionally have to do a late season spray, but we usually feel like we can outrun the spotted wing in the blueberries. It's more of a fall issue for us, and it's and obviously the raspberries are much more attractive as well than the blueberries as far as the fruit is concerned. I think the other thing to factor in, and I don't know if people with the larger structures have seen this or any structure, but is the airflow is definitely impeded with the netting. And so along with the netting, we've on the raspberries really taken the time to keep the rows narrow. They're about a foot wide, and then within that we strip leaves, similar to, I don't know what you do, tomatoes or something like that, where up 2.5 or 3 feet. So there's ample airflow, but it also eliminates kind of the the desirable environment for SWD to hang out and breed in. But that's made a big difference, I think. Early on, we started, I guess, 2013 doing this, and early on we were seeing a little bit of rust on the raspberries, and then really once we started opening up the canopy, it was eliminated almost instantly. So what else about it? We use a clip system, PVC. PVC is okay. Metal or metal or wood certainly would be better, but we use a combination of clips and then wiggle wire on the hoops to pinch it on. This year we're going to use we're netting some different houses, some Arnois, and so it'll be all wiggle wire. And I'm curious about the longevity of it and tearing and things like that. So jury's out, but it hasn't been bad on our end walls at all. So, but it's incredibly effective as long as you get it on in time. Would be the the take home. We usually try to have it. How are you
attaching it? Adam, how are you attaching it on the sidewalls?
Sidewalls, we have so we bring an interior underneath the plastic, and then we use clips on the hoops there. It's 2 people set it up, and it takes about a day to set up, and one person's basically pulling, we just start at one end and one person's pulling tension, and the other person is attaching clips the whole way around, and it works pretty well. We've had some wind episodes where it's done a number, but all in all, it's effective. And then on the ground, we've just used rocks and kind of whatever we have around. I mean, it's not it's flying, so it's not crawling. So long as it's pretty well sealed on the ground, it seems to be effective. Old rebar works, old greenhouse parts seem to, it's whatever we have around, really.
And the air limitation is going to be a lot more concern with a high tunnel than the open field.
Yeah.
Because at least my experience in my small plantings is that it's pretty remarkably, a nice and working environment in there. You do get the breezes and the sun and the rain, and I don't know if Dale, if you want to comment on. I mean, there's even been some anecdotal reports that the growing environment is better for the crops under the netting than outside. Has there been any follow-up research on that, Dale?
I haven't.
Oh, Dale's breaking up a little.
It looks like you remuted, Dale. There you go.
Yep, sorry about that. So I think Minnesota has been doing a little bit of work, but their tunnels are really quite small, so it's a little bit hard to say. I just know that in my blueberry planting, we are just getting these crazy high yields. And I've seen the same in our raspberry tunnel. We do have our raspberry tunnel covered as well. But I was just doing some kind of quick flower bud counts this spring in the blueberries. And at each flower bud, I usually would think of a standard blueberry bush giving like 6 to 18 flowers per flower bud. And what I was getting for counts this year was 8 to 14. The berries literally are in clusters like grapes. So it's really quite amazing. The raspberries, what we have done is we don't have the open ends like Adam does. We have a rimmel tunnel. So we have netting on the sidewalls. We have it on the end through covering what used to be our sliding doors. And then I actually added some netting up in the gable end, which has really helped with airflow. We have had some issues with humidity buildup. So we actually, that's why we put the netting in the gable ends, and it definitely has helped. We actually have run an extension cord out to the tunnel and are running a fan in the middle of the tunnel to help with the airflow a little bit. I will say that when we put the netting up, you know, it's a couple hours, we wiggle wire it in. We have double wire lock channel on the hip board, and then we just used batten tape on the baseboard. So we can get it up in a couple hours. And we're on year 4 now of it being on our raspberry tunnel with just a couple minor repairs on the sidewalls. And for people wondering, so Chris has brought up the photo there. So the raspberry tunnel is on the right. And I would not do this without having at least 6-foot sidewalls on your tunnel because of the restriction in airflow. But if you have 6-foot sidewalls and you keep your sides up on a regular basis, I think you're in good shape. To net this tunnel, it costs $288 for one roll of 6.5-foot wide by 328-foot long netting. That's a 144-foot long house. So it's really pretty inexpensive. It's a lot cheaper than buying a container of Entrust or Delegate. And we use the vestibule system on that one as well. I actually wasn't aware of the work that Peter had done showing how much of a difference the vestibule system made. We've used a vestibule since the very start, and I do think that's a key to helping keep this pest down at low levels.
Thanks. I see Paul Betts is here too. Paul, I ran through images of your system before you arrived. I can put them back up and maybe you can give us a little more detail or answer questions.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry I was late. I had a thing that just got out. So
No
mine
problem.
is it's fairly overbuilt, and I did it for a couple of reasons. One was that when we started our blueberry thing, we planted them the year that SWD landed in the Pacific Northwest. And our plan had been to plant, 450 bushes every year for 4 or 5 years and fill that entire hillside and run a pick your own. And then I actually kind of stopped taking care of them until someone figured out how to address this bug when they started to migrate and weren't having trouble managing winters and all those kinds of things. And so we kind of revitalized the patch a couple years ago. And for me, I took it personally. I was so offended by the SWD that I built this thing really as like a personal response. So it's very overbuilt. And I kind of decided that I had never really overbuilt anything in my farming career. And so I kind of did this largely for myself as well. I think that you could certainly, the netting doesn't really weigh anything. And so this grid could be increased to a 15 by 15 and cut down on piping costs pretty dramatically. And it's a younger patch. But in terms of an environment in which to pick, like it's not claustrophobic. You don't feel it's pretty tight, and so you really feel like you're in a structure. And not knowing how much has been set up until this point, the evenings and the mornings are an amazing time to pick in this. It does get a little bit hot, but there's no mosquitoes, there's no deer flies, and where I live, not having to deal with those creatures is pretty amazing. It's a nice extra benefit. There's no bird pressure in here. The first year that we had any blueberries in the patch, I had a flock of turkeys come through, and not an exaggeration, they stripped every berry in the entire planting. And so that's something that's been removed from our system as well. So I'm pretty happy with it. Like we were going to go full pick your own this season, and decided that the logistics of doing a pick your own in a COVID world were more than I wanted to take on. The guidelines were well thought out, and I'm not going to challenge or question them. They were just more than we were willing to take on. But I also, when I built this, I wanted to kind of envision like what it would be like to have general population in this structure. And so entrance and egress still needs to be figured out a little bit, but you don't have dangers of running into pipe, because the lowest pipe is about 6.5 feet tall. So I was trying to think about what it would be like to have general population who's not necessarily paying attention to what they're doing at any given time.
And Paul, can you describe this wiggle wire system? I take it this is one panel that goes all the way around the side, or is it part of?
Yeah, so it's the sewn 13, so it's two 26-foot pieces to cover the top, and then a 6.5 piece that goes around the side. And I did it that way because of I wanted to kind of mitigate any measurement error. And rather than have the 13.5, the 26 piece kind of go over the side and come up to the top, I wanted to kind of like remove any kind of site configuration from the equation. And so that's why I did it in those two different pieces. It's on a hill site. Like we planted the berries in a contour for aesthetics, but it is clearly not the most ideal rectangle in which to encase with this netting. So I felt by using one piece along the sides and then different pieces on the top, I could kind of like give myself a little bit of slack when it came to putting the stuff on. And we didn't get the double wiggle wire, but we get two pieces of wiggle wire in it. So the top is secured, and then we run the sides on top, and we just make sure that the wire goes the opposite direction, and it seems to hold pretty well. And it
Paul,
took about, yes, sir?
Paul, it's Chris Callahan. Hey, I was curious, how are those posts driven into the ground, or your vertical
They
posts?
are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're in about 2 feet. And it took, I did it with like a fence post driver. We were thoughtful to make them be plumb so that the structure wouldn't kind of fall off the hill, because it's hard to get a sense of it, but there's a pretty significant slope. But so they're all driven in about 2 feet. And I think I only had to cut one, which was a miracle in terms of getting the same depth across the entire structure.
You ran into a rock or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, but High Ledge Farm, to be clear, like we're pretty ledgy around here, and so to have only one need to be cut was pretty amazing.
That's great. Yeah, the equipment. Yeah. I mean, post drivers and earth augers. Boy, we could have a whole twilight on that. Yeah. Nice job.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, and my boy would kind of hold a level on them, so that we could be plumb, and then I was the one who was driving them.
I have a question. Would it be possible with a grid like that to not, and guide wires on edges or something, to actually have it be self-standing, the whole structure, like at all?
That's pretty close to the steel portion of Dalilah's. There are earth anchors that get sort of a helical anchor that gets screwed into the ground, and then the steel post just sits on top of that, and really almost all your strength comes from the tensile wire.
Yeah.
All of your rigidity. Those posts are pretty wobbly, and they're meant to be, so that it'll fail intentionally, instead of tearing everything apart. So yeah, Hans, I think you could. You need some uplift protection though.
Right. Cool.
And how
I when
far are
I
those
designed
posts
this,
in the ground?
I'm sorry.
These posts are about 2 feet into the ground in this picture. And so those holes are augered, and then the wood posts get put in. But the steel posts, which are to the right of this, where this photo is taken, are sitting on top of those earth anchors. And you can see an earth anchor in the bottom left corner of this picture, where the cable's connected at the ground. Black steel rather.
Can I just make 2 comments
Yeah, great.
on something that Paul mentioned? One, to follow up on Paul. One is, you know, when I first started doing all this netting work, one of the things I never thought of was the protection from other weather events. And Paul mentioned about, you know, the wildlife and all that, but we just had in 10 minutes, 36 hours ago, in 10 minutes, we had 1/3 of an inch of rain. We had really strong winds, and it used to be that after weather events like that came through, the ground would just be blue with all the dropped berries, and that doesn't happen now. The ground is turning blue from dropped berries because we have so many, we can't get them all picked at once. But the weather events are basically non-existent, because while wind will get through there and you can still get a nice light breeze, for heavy wind, it does diffuse the wind quite a bit. And for heavy rain, you know, it definitely diffuses the raindrops. So that's a really great thing. And I would agree about the whole thing about being overbuilt. I mean, I kind of feel like this new structure is rather overbuilt, because for years I just used my old cannibalized hoop houses that I had, and while it wasn't as high and it wasn't as easy to move around inside, and this is a whole lot nicer. The you know, we had the hoops spaced every 21 feet, and we just had simple ground posts for some of them, and others we didn't even put a ground post in. We just stuck those in the ground to get them in a hurry, and it held up through the weather just fine as well. I did take some kind of cool video last week as a storm came through, and you can see the netting rising up above the cables and billowing and such. So it tends to be standing up pretty well, but I think that people can probably get away with wider spacing. It's just, we need to figure out what is the widest that we can go and still be able to withstand a strong thunderstorm that might come through.
Yeah, the wind does tend to lift it up if it's not weighted. I had mine lifted up, and it kind of just moved a lot of the smaller rocks off, and it was hanging loose. I had to go back and replace them. But Dale, you just sent me before we started some pictures of how you're using sand to seal the edges. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, so on our old planting, I had actually used a perimeter baseboard with a wiggle wire because I wanted to make sure everything was secure. And then we filled in along with gravel where there might be open areas. This year we did not do the perimeter baseboard because it's such a heavy duty structure, but where we were anchoring them down with, we used clips with the netting attached to some purlin pipes. And because the ground is not laser leveled, you know, we would have like 3-inch gaps underneath. And I fear that spotted wing can get in under gaps that are that big. So I got 1 truckload of sand delivered, and we have just covered the netting around the perimeter with probably 3 inches of sand, about 6 inches wide or so. And that's working really well as an anchor to keep anything from being able to get underneath there as far as insects go. I found one spot yesterday where a vole or something has tunneled through the sand, but that's pretty easy to fix. I'm not sure that sand would keep it anchored if it was being lifted up by the wind, but there is a perimeter cable on the system that goes through all these perimeter anchors, and the netting is also attached with grommets down at that ground level. So it's about 4 to 6 inches above the ground, wherever the anchors are above the ground. There is a cable that runs through there, and that will keep it from lifting up too much but I think you still, because of uneven ground, you still need something to be able to seal those areas where something can crawl underneath, whether it be a spotted wing or whatever.
I'd wonder about lay flat hose, because I've seen people use that for tunnel plastic edges.
Yeah, something like that would probably work just fine as well.
Do other people on the call have netting systems up they want to describe? I see Dan MacArthur. I know you've got the smart netting for birds on your blueberries, right? But
yeah, that's right. We've never experimented with this Protect Net. That's why we're here, is to kind of investigate it. Smart Net, if anybody's thinking of just bird netting, we're not sure how long it's going to hold up. You know, can we afford to replace it every 6 or 8 years? Don't know about that. It's kind of not the topic of today's, but I was curious to see how long people are finding the Protect Net might last. That would be a question I would have.
Well, I guess the first thing is to address the naming of these nets. So correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, but originally Dubois came out with a netting that they called Protect Net, and they had the 80 gram, the 60 gram, the 25 gram that all had small enough mesh for spotted wing. Don't bother with the 25. It's so flimsy, you know, get a season or two and it's full of rips. The 80, like I said, I put my 80 on, I think in 2012, and it's, you know, still serviceable, but it's got some rips and tears and it's been patched. So I think it had a 7-year lifespan originally stated, and it's exceeded that, but it seems like 7. And then I got some of this 80 and 85 from Dale, and the 85 seems really durable with that extra ripstop. So are those still being rated? And it's called TechNet, right, Dale? Not ProTechNet now?
It's actually called Exclusion Netting. So what it is ProtectNet is a brand name that Dubois came up with that they use on all their netting products, no matter where it came from. Exclusion Netting is made by TechNet Industries, who originally made the original, what Dubois calls ProtectNet. But TechNet now has us as the distributor for the US. And the last I knew, I do not know if Dubois has any of TechNet's original product left. The 80 gram netting that is available is similar to what was made back in 2012, although they have integrated some improvements into it that I've suggested based on using it for a number of years. And the 85 gram netting is a brand new product specifically based on me saying, these are the deficiencies of the 80 gram netting, and this is what you need to do to improve it. But it's officially called Exclusion Net, so Exclusion Netting. It's manufactured by TechNet Industries, and we're the ones that are distributing it. So I know it's very confusing. The 60 gram netting in my original SARE Farmer grant did not exclude spotted wing Drosophila enough. So I would never use the 60 gram netting for spotted wing Drosophila. It works on a lot of vegetable insects that are larger, but the mesh is just too large and spotted wing will get through there. The 80 gram netting.
60 was like a 1.5 by 1 millimeter, I think. So I think you're supposed to be 1 millimeter square or less.
So the 80 gram and 85 gram are 0.95 millimeters by 0.65 millimeters. That's what they are aiming for in the factory when they're manufacturing it. And
what is the lifespan?
So
what lifespan are they predicting?
Yeah, so they guarantee it against UV degradation for 5 years. I can say that I used my 80 gram netting for 6 years, and if I had not erected a new structure this year, I would still be using a bunch of the same 80 gram netting. I had one piece that we had some issues with abrasion from a 90-degree angle last year on some PVC pipe. So that was one of the things that made me want to look at this structure instead. But I will also say the 80 gram netting that I've been using for 6 years on blueberries, I have used on multiple vegetable crops this year, including melons that are looking great. So UV degradation, you know, again, they warranty it for 5 years. They've used it in Canada for 12 years on baby greens, multiple applications per season. So a lot of it depends on how well you take care of it. We actually store ours in the field now during the winter, wrapped up in UV resistant pallet wrap. So it's something that with good care can last for a really long time.
And you take it off and wrap it up as soon as harvest is complete?
No, I actually have left mine up probably a month and a half longer than harvest, because we've had people wanting to look at the structure and see what it looks like when it's up. So we generally have had ours up from late June, usually till about the middle of October. This year, I hope to get it down closer to when harvest is done, maybe by mid-September. And again, we actually won't be taking it down. On the photo that's showing here, we'll be wrapping, the sidewall will come up to the top of those wooden posts, and the first panel that goes between the two wooden posts will get wrapped back to the set of poles that have the side panel, and it will be wrapped up around that cable and wrapped in UV resistant pallet wrap and stored on the structure for the winter. And then the next two panels will be released and wrapped around one cable down the middle of the planting, and then the same thing will happen on the north side as well. So we'll have 3 sets of netting stored on the cables, wrapped up for the winter for storage.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left and we have to yield this platform to a different meeting that's coming up. Is anybody on that had something to share that didn't have a chance so far?
I want to make sure that anyone who wants to come and visit knows that they are welcome to come and visit what I've done as well. And so Paul at highmowingseeds.com is a good way to get in touch with me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for sharing that information, and Adam and Dale and Steve Vandivord and Rob Meadows and whoever I'm leaving off. And these slides will be posted. I'll provide a link to this as well as the recording. And thank you very much, Chris Callahan, for setting us up, hosting the GoToMeeting. And stay tuned. We'll be putting together a series of weekly meetings on a variety of vegetable and berry topics. So I'll be sending that out to the list soon. Hope everybody has a great afternoon. We'll see you
Thanks,
later.
Vern. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vern.
Thanks, Vern.
Thank you.